Hi, welcome to 123stitch.com. Today I'm going to show you how to take a stitched Lizzie Kate design and turn it into one of these adorable stand-ups. It's quick and easy to do. You need a sewing machine, but only for one simple seam. The rest is done by hand, and I'm going to take you through it step by step. Before we get started though, please click on that subscribe button down below so you don't miss out on a thing. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Besides a sewing machine, ironing board, and iron, here are some of the supplies we're going to need to complete our design. Our stitched piece. We're going to need the paper pattern that came with the pattern. It's got the template for the outside as well as the bottom base. We're going to need a coordinating backing fabric. For this design, I've chosen black with white stars and enough extra to cover the bottom portion as well. We'll need a mounting board, mat board to cut out the bottom circle, pins, black sewing thread to match the backing fabric. Along with that, either chenille embroidery or sewing needles to sew with. 2 sizes scissors. I like large size to cut fabric and a smaller one to cut the corners. Some sort of pointing tool is nice. This is used for stuffing the design. This one has a sharp point or pointy point so you can get those corners easily, as well as a thicker portion to help push the stuffing in. Some people use chopsticks. You can use the eraser end of a pencil. I like to have some erasable markers to draw the pattern onto the fabric. Tacky glue, this one is Aleene's fabric glue. Interfacing, we need a fusible or iron-on interfacing. This one I've chosen for today is a medium weight. A ruler. Some sort of cording to finish the outside edges. Now, if your design has lots of colors in it, the backing fabric is kind of solid, you might want to make your own cording out of colors that are used in the design. Since I have a black backing, I'm going to use a solid black cording that I've purchased. You also need lots of polyester fiber fill. Everything I've mentioned today, I'll have in links in the description below as well. And if there's anything else we need that I've forgotten right now, I'll make sure to link that as well. All right, let's go ahead and get started on our design. Okay, the design I'm working with today is Broomstick by Lizzie Kate. All of the stand-up designs come with embellishments. This one comes with buttons, ribbon, a bell, beads, fuzzy hair, and a broomstick. So the very first thing you're going to want to decide is which embellishments do you want to put on after you've done the interfacing, and which ones do you want to wait to add until the very end when the design is done. The reason you might want to wait is so that they don't get messed up when you're turning the design and stuffing the design. Sometimes it's just easier to do at the very end. In this case, the only ones I've done are the beads on the bottom here. The rest is going to wait till I'm done. So poor Betty is going to be bald until the very end of our project here. And I would add, if you're going to add any, I would do it after you do the interfacing. When you put the interfacing on, you want the design to get as flat as possible and have that interfacing really adhere. So put it on first and then do your embellishments if you're going to do that. So I have done the iron-on interfacing on the design itself and the backing fabric already. The reason we do this is so that it gives us a better surface to work with when we're stuffing the design so none of the threads get caught, and also it locks in the thread. And as you can see, I've done a larger piece than I need. I just like to have a little bit more to work with. So both the stitch piece and the backing fabric now have interfacing on them. And this is fusible interfacing. You can read the directions on it, but basically it usually needs a medium heat iron and you just press it on until it adheres. Super easy to put on. So now that we've got that on, next thing we need to do is cut out our pattern. And the designs come with a paper template that I've cut out, and it has the center top and the center bottom marked already. So what we need to do is find the center top and bottom of our design. If it's not super obvious, refer back to your pattern, and it will have the top center and the bottom center already marked. So what we're going to do is find the top center, which is here, and then the instructions say to measure 1.5 inches over the top of the design. And actually the top is up here. So I'm going to do about 1.5 inches. Make sure that's a straight line. And then what I'm going to do is take my erasable marker. I'm going to make a little point at the top here, just to show that's where I marked my 1.5 inches above. And for the bottom, it says to go 2 inches below. And the center is right there in this case. I'm going to line that up. And then I'm going to do about 2 inches below. Below doesn't matter as much. We want extra down here so we can turn it up underneath to have something to support our base. So that's going to be the top and the bottom already marked. Now we need to get our pattern on here. And this is where our pins are going to come in handy. We're also going to put a pin in the top here. I like to do it above the mark and then stick the pin in. And down here, same thing. Move below the mark and get the pin in there. So we can kind of line up our pattern. And what I find useful is to hold it up to a light or a window so you can kind of see how it looks on both sides. Does it look straight? Does it look a little crooked? You need to even it out. We're going to come down a little to get our 2 inches. And right there. That's centered. So what you can do is you can put some pins in the pattern, first of all. Mark it in just a couple of spots so we can really hold it up to light and see what we've got. Okay. And what you want is about equal spacing on both sides of the design. And once we have that, I think it looks pretty straight. It's following the line of the linen down here. Arrows lined up. And the top of my arrows lined up. So now what you can do is you can either just cut around the outside edges or you can take some sort of marking pen and mark around the outside. It doesn't matter too much because you will be sewing inside that line, inside the cutting line. It won't show at all. So I'm going to go ahead and just mark a couple things here. And I'm going to take this up and I'm going to look again and see how that looks. That looks pretty good. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is mark the design the rest of the way so that I can cut it out. You can draw a solid line. You can draw partial lines, whatever works for you. You don't have to draw it at all. You can just pin and you can just cut or you can mark it. All right. Now we're going to get our fabric scissors and we're going to cut this out. Trying to keep it as close to the line as possible. And then once we have this piece cut out, we're going to go ahead and do the backing fabric next. Cut across the bottom. Okay, that's done. Let's take the pins out and see if it still looks okay. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Looks pretty even on both sides. We've got extra on the top and the bottom. So then what I'm going to do is put this on my backing fabric and cut out an identical piece. Again, I think I'll mark it. You can draw all the way around if it's easier for you. I just like to do little dashes. And then we're just going to cut along the bottom line here. Okay. Cut this out all the way around. And the next thing we do is sew. All right, so we've got our backing fabric and we've got a stitch piece. Now we're going to put the right sides or the pretty sides together. Make sure they line up. And we're going to put some pins in it. And then what we're going to do is go to the sewing machine and we're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam all the way around. We're going to leave the bottom open, but we're going to do a 1/4 inch seam all the way around these sides. And at the bottom, we're going to make sure we do a back stitch to really reinforce that. So when we turn it, the seam doesn't come apart. Let's go ahead and do that, and then we'll come back and do the next step. Okay, we are back. We have sewn the seams all around our design and left the bottom open. What we're going to do right now is trim the seams up a little bit. It's already a pretty small seam, but I'm going to trim it just a little bit more. On both straight sides, we're going to trim. And then at the top, we're going to do something different. Okay, at the top, what we want to do is to get rid of all the bulk is use our little scissors. Cut some of that off there. And cut out little triangles. Being careful not to cut that thread. We're just going to clip little triangles out of the fabric so that we have a little bit more give. When we turn this, we want to be able to keep the curve in it. And if we've got too much fabric up there, too much bulk, then that's not going to happen. Let's trim this a little first. We've got a lot of extra fabric up here. It just makes it a lot easier if you've got less fabric to deal with at the top. You want to have some nice crisp corners. I like to use little sharp scissors to do this. Careful not to clip the edges. Just going to do this all the way across the top. It's almost done. We're going to stuff next, which is the most time-consuming part. But, you know, take your time. You don't have to do it all in one day if it's too much. Because you really need to take your time with it. You want to stuff slowly so that you don't get lumps and bumps. Certainly not hard, but just time-consuming. Let's do a few more here. Get around the top. You can do as many as you want or as few as you want. I just like to get as much of that bulk out there as I can. And by doing these little triangles, it seems to work better than to just cutting it down. Gives it a little bit more space. A couple more here. And here. All right, now that we've made a mess and cut out all our little triangles, we're going to turn this inside out. I'm just going to grab it and start turning and see what we've got. This is where you're going to want your pointing tool or your chopstick or whatever you have on hand to get the corners out. I'm going to pull it out as much as I can first. Look how cute that is. So I'm going to take my pointing tool. I'm going to go way up in the top and I'm just going to run it along the edges and pop those seams open. You can see where I'm getting that nice curve on the top because I clipped the corners. And keep in mind, it doesn't have to be perfect. We're going to be covering this with cording as well. And that makes everything look better. But we want to get it as good as we can. So I'm just going to pop that open a little bit more. Go all the way around. Sometimes I think the unsharpened pencil or the eraser end of the pencil works really well here. We want to get it open before we start stuffing, because it's easier to do now than it is later. That looks pretty good. Okay, the other thing we're going to do down here is we're going to turn up the bottom. I wanted to mention, if you feel like this is kind of wrinkled now, you can go ahead and press it when it's like this. For the bottom, we have to decide, we have extra fabric, so we're going to decide where we're going to fold it under. I like to go about maybe 4 or 5 thread lengths when I do it. So we're going to turn this in. I'm going to turn the bottom in. Remember, we cut an extra 2 inches on the bottom. Turn this in until we get to the approximate point where we want our bottom to be. We're going to be putting cording on the bottom, so we want to make sure that we leave room for the shoes to show through. That looks good. We're just going to finger crease that. You can press that down too if you want. And then we're going to start stuffing it. Let me get all my little scraps out of the way here. All right, I'm using polyester fiber fill. And the way to use this is, let's grab a bunch out. You're going to need a lot, but you need to separate them. In order to get this not to bunch up, you just need to pull pieces off. Break it up a little bit, and then you can start stuffing. Break those up. If you don't do it, it gets lumpy and bumpy, and nobody wants lumpy and bumpy. All right, we're going to start stuffing. And we can use our tool. We can use the pointy end of the tool. We can use the other end of the tool. We can use whatever we have to just start filling it up and filling those corners. If this starts to come apart for you, you can always pin it down. We're going to mess with it later, so it doesn't really matter right now. But if it gets in the way while you're stuffing, you can always pin that down or baste it in place temporarily if you need to. So anyway, just keep stuffing this up until it's all full. It's going to take a lot of stuffing. You can do a little bit at a time. At first, it's going to look like you're not doing anything because it takes a lot. But just keep getting it in those corners. You can look on the front and the back. You want to get rid of those little creases in there. And we're going to stuff the whole thing. We're going to get all the way to the bottom. I'm not going to have you watch me do that though. So I'm going to stuff the whole thing. And when we're down to the bottom, we'll come back and I'll show you how to put the base on. Okay, we're done stuffing the design. It's nice and firm and even all around. And I've left the bottom overflowing just a tiny bit so that when we put the bottom on, it stays full. I did end up pinning the bottom hem in place so it stayed out of my way while I was stuffing it. The next step is going to be to cut out our base. The pattern comes with a paper base pattern. We're going to cut this out of a piece of cardboard or mat board. I have cut mine out of a piece of press-on board. And then we're going to see how well it fits on the bottom. We're going to try it out from the mat board instead of the pattern just because it's easier to see if it fits using something sturdy like the cardboard as opposed to paper. It looks pretty good. You just want it to be on the edge so that when you sew, it's perfect size for it. If you need to trim it down, you can do so now. If you need it a little bigger, you're going to need to cut out another one. Then we will take our backing fabric, lay our mat board that we've cut out on top of the backing fabric, and then cut it out about 1 inch extra all around the circle. Does not have to be perfect. We're just going to be gathering that so it fits on the base. So I've done that here. And because this is press-on, I am going to actually peel that off and stick it approximately in the center. Now it's going to stay in place while I'm sewing. And I'm going to be doing a running stitch all the way around so I can gather the edges in. I'm using my sewing thread that matches my backing fabric, and I'm using a chenille or sewing needle that has been knotted at one end. From the inside, I'm going to go about halfway down, maybe a little less, and knot that on the inside. And then I'm just going to be doing a running stitch, which means I'm going in and out of my fabric about every 1/4 inch and going to be going all the way around. And when I pull that, it's going to start to gather it. So let's do that all the way around. All the way around. Does not have to be perfect, doesn't need to be pretty. This is where I like the mat board, this press on, because it just keeps it in place. Otherwise you'd kind of be holding it in place with your hand. Just a matter of preference, you don't have to do it. You can see what it's doing already. If you find you have too much fabric, you can always cut it down, but I find that this works pretty good. I always like to have more fabric rather than less so that I have leeway. If I need to cut it down, I can, but if it needs to be bigger, I'm out of luck. Okay, you can see how easy and fast this goes. I'm going to go all the way around to the end. And you definitely want a sewing or embroidery chenille needle instead of your tapestry needle that you use for cross stitch. You want that sharp point to get through the fabric. If you try to do this with a tapestry needle, it does not go through the fabric so easy, and you will regret it. All right, I'm at the end. I'm going to pull this nice and tight. Now, this is just going to be on the bottom. So what it looks like on the inside does not matter at all. So I'm just going to knot this off by doing a loop a couple of times, keeping that tight. If you really wanted to get it nice and flat on there, you could always do a little bit of a lacing stitch here where you run all the way through from one side to the other. I don't think it's necessary though, so we're just going to knot this off. Now, one other thing that I want to mention, it's listed on your instructions, it's optional. Let me cut this off. Not one time here. Cut this off. One other thing I wanted to mention is if you want to have a little weight at the bottom of your stand-up so it stands up better, you can do so at this point. You can glue it right down in the center here. What I would recommend is using a drapery weight. I like those because they're covered with fabric and you can just glue them right in place and they'll stay. Now, I have never used weights with my stand-ups. I find they stand up just fine on their own, but that's an option if you decide you want to do so. So you can see fabric covered. I'm going to take my design and I'm going to put it on and see how does it look. I think it looks pretty good. I'm going to take a needle again and knotted with my sewing thread and my chenille needle, and I'm going to start in the seam on the inside so I can get that knot on the inside. There we go. And what we're going to do is be doing a whip stitch. So we're going to take a little piece of the bottom fabric and run it through the bottom of the design. I'm going to do that all the way around. Just gather a little piece from the edge there and get a piece of fabric from the bottom of our stitch piece. We're just going to do that all the way around. Now, I'm using black thread on the black fabric. Works great, hides it perfectly. When I get to the orange, the thread is going to show a little bit, but it's not going to matter because we're going to be covering that with cording later on. So we're just going to go all the way around with our needle and thread, gathering some thread from the bottom and then going through here. We're not going to get caught on our pin, so we can get rid of that now. And we're just going to go all the way around to the other side. I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to come back and show you what it looks like. And you can see I've got little stuffing sticking out. We can trim that out later. If you find that it seems like it's not puffy enough at the bottom, now's the time to add more fiber fill. Okay, I'll be back when this is all stitched around. Okay, I have finished sewing around the bottom. Two things I wanted to point out. First of all, when you're measuring the base size, make sure that the mat board fits comfortably inside of the opening of the bottom of your design. I quickly discovered mine was a little bit too big, so I had to take it apart, cut it down a little bit, and start over. Didn't take too long, but save yourself the trouble. Make sure it fits really well before you start. The other thing is, when you're sewing the front side of the design, I think I would actually start on the front, because you want to make sure that you keep this even space here that you decided you wanted before. And try to pick up just one linen thread without distorting it or pulling it out of shape. The back side's a lot easier to do. So now that she's done and she stands up quite nicely, we're going to put the cording on. As I mentioned before, I'm using a purchased cording, but you can use one that you've made yourself. You might pick some colors out of the design that you like and then make your own cording. Whatever you do, start the end with it knotted off. I have knotted the very end and then cut it. That way it doesn't unravel, because cording will unravel on you. What we're going to need is some straight pins. We're going to need some glue. I like using Aleene's Tacky glue. And we're going to need our thread at some point, as well as some scissors. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a combination of gluing and pinning the design to hold it in place. I mean the cording to hold it in place. We're going to start on this side, and we're going to go close to the end, but not all the way down. The reason is we're going to be going this way around the bottom of the design, and we want to leave enough room there for that to fit. So we're going to take our glue, and we're going to start with a line of glue along the seam. And thankfully this dries clear, so we can get rid of that extra for now. We're going to just lay our cording on, leaving a little bit of extra room at the bottom. And what I would do is work from the front side of your design, because you want to make sure you cover the seam and it looks best from the front side. You're going to do a little bit of glue, and then you're going to do a pin right inside there to hold it in place. Then we're going to do a little bit more glue. Mine is not coming out nice and neat. And then lay the cording down. And put another pin in. And the pin is, again, just holding it in place. Once it's dry, we're going to pull the pins out. You could, if you want, sew the cording on instead of gluing it. That would just be a whip stitch where you're going around the edge of you're just encircling the cording and then attaching it. I don't like doing that. I think it's harder to do. Plus it leaves some gaps. Gluing lets you get every little space covered. And we're going to go around the top corner. Glue in place. There's several of these designs that you can do. There's the needle nick and flossy class, very popular for Christmas. You can do Clara and Henry O'Hare. Those are the kind of Easter spring designs. And then Betty Broomstick here has the companion Vinnie Von Fang. There's a Lady Liberty and Liberty Sam. And then lastly, there are the Para Pilgrims. Those were the first designs that Lizzie Kate did as stand-ups. Go around the corner here. And we're using Aleene's Tacky glue so it dries clear. So my extra glue is going to disappear. We won't have to worry about it. Trying to be as neat as I can, but my glue is not coming out as neatly as I would like it to. There we go, that's a little better. And gone around the top. When I do the pins, I try to get it in the open space between the braids. A little easier to get in there. Okay, now we're on the other side. Finish pinning this, and then I'm going to show you how to go around the bottom. These really aren't too much work, and they are so cute when they're finished. I get lots of comments on mine. Now I'm going to have to stitch Beanie Von Fang for Betty here. I did it once before, but I need to do it again so she has her companion piece. Go. Get to the bottom, and then I'll show you what we do down there. That pin doesn't want to go in. There we go. Okay, when we get to the bottom, we're going to put a pin right at the point where it meets the bottom edge. And then we're going to turn, and I like to go to the front. Put an extra pin in here. And we're going to do glue right around the front edge. If you're making your own cording, which is always fun to do, just measure all the way around the top side of the design, around the bottom of the design, and then I would give yourself at least 6 inches extra so you have plenty to play with should you need it. It's never good to go short. There we go, and see how that's covering up any stitches that we've done before. Go around this way, and now you can see where it is covering my starting point. So that's meeting up to where I started, and it's covering it. Give me some more room there. Oops, let's get some glue on here, especially on that corner. And then we're going to go around the back side. We're almost at the end here. Make sure I have enough pins in. Hold it in place. See what that looks like. Okay, let's get the rest of this here. Then when we get to the end, we're going to need to cut the cording. But before we cut it, we're going to need to tie a knot in it because cording likes to unravel. So we want to make sure that we have a nice neat end. So we're going to go past what we want to do is get our sewing thread and sew a knot right there, right where the seam comes in. I'm going to get my thread, get a length of that, and I'm going to get my thread, hopefully you can see this, right there at the seam. I'm going to tie a knot, capture it right at the seam. I'm actually going to tie it twice to make sure it's nice and knotted. And then I can cut the thread off just a tiny bit past the knot. I'm sorry, cut the cord off just a tiny bit past the knot. Okay, trim my threads there. Now I'm going to glue the rest of this down, making sure I get in that corner. And then what I'm going to do with the end piece, let me put some pins in here. What I'm going to do with the end piece is I'm going to get some glue bunch of glue and put it on the bottom. And just kind of run it along there. I'm gluing it down to the bottom as close as I can, as flat as I can. So the knot will be hidden below, and yet it won't affect standing up of the design. Put a little bit more on there. And it won't be visible from the front. So you'll be able to see it's not visible on the front side, and our cording is all done. Now we've got pins in it and we've got wet glue. So what we're going to do is, first of all, make sure it looks like it's all glued down. If you need to add some more glue somewhere, go ahead and do so now. And then we're just going to let this sit for maybe an hour, perhaps. And then when I feel like the glue is dry, I'm going to take all the pins out. I'm going to put the embellishments back on her, including the cute little broomstick and her fuzzy hair. And then I'm going to come back and show you the finished design. So we'll be back soon. Here's my finished Betty broomstick. I think she turned out super cute and was not too hard to make at all. I hope the instructions were helpful to you, but if you have any questions, please let us know in the comment section below. We love to hear from you. You might want to try one of the other patterns like Needle, Nick, and Flossy Closs here. I'll have links to the patterns in the description below. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on anything, and we'll see you again soon.